they made a fortune off of it. And so my whole thing about talking about that as much as I did, y'all, was the fact that that is just such a great example for the Gilded Age of people who will make their money, but they don't give a flying you-know-what about anybody else. I'm going to make my money. I'm already rich. I'm going to get richer and that. And that's what I say in the video. All right, so this is where the new stuff starts in. It's 1872, right? Grant is running for re-election. Now, believe it or not, as you guys will find out, Grant actually considered a third term, but they said, no, thanks. But Grant is running for a second term. Now, sadly, you know, most of the attention is the corruption. Now, Grant himself, we have never been able to prove. And there's a great biography by the guy who wrote the book Hamilton, on which the musical is based, by the way, y'all. There's a great new biography, a relatively new biography about Grant that I really need to read. But as far as I know, no one has ever really proven, y'all, that Grant himself was in this. His wife may have been. It's hard to think that he wouldn't be. And definitely his brother-in-law was in. So corruption was all around him. So he's not a very good judge of character. So most of the people, y'all, were getting kind of disgusted with him. But, you know, a lot of people were still like, hey, man, it's General Grant. You know, he won the Civil War. He kept our country together. I don't care what he does. He's General Grant. But you had a lot of Republicans, y'all, deserting him. Now, I'm not trying to be political in any way. I try not to do that. You guys are, but I will make some connections. You guys know a lot of Republicans are not happy with President Trump, right? They weren't when he was running the first time. They weren't happy with him. They said that he, you know, when he was running the first time, and of course, after this Capitol riot, a lot of Republicans want to distance themselves from him, right? Not saying I agree or disagree. That's up to you. But the thing is, y'all, the same thing was happening with Grant. A lot of Republicans were like, man, I don't want to be around this guy. Corruption is everywhere. Well, what do? Do you form a new political party? Do you join the Democrats? You know, what if you disagree with all their beliefs? And that's where a lot of Republicans are right now, y'all, just like a lot of Republicans were in 1872. We don't like the guy who's at the charge, who's at the head of our party. Where do we go? What do we do? And so what they're going to do, y'all, is really bizarre in 1872. A Republican, he was a Republican newspaper publisher by the name of Horace Greeley. Ironically, not that ironically, but Horace Greeley is the name of the school of the lady, y'all, who helped me learn how to do all these PowerPoints, okay? Mrs. Poyer, Susan Poyer, teaches at Horace Greeley in New York. And it was her PowerPoints that really kind of taught me how to do these. She really kind of showed the cool things you could do. And I never noticed that until today. I was looking like, hey, you know, Mrs. Poyer teaches at Horace Greeley. That's so cool. I'm talking about Horace Greeley today. Now, Horace Greeley, as you can see here, is a somewhat unusual looking dude. He's got these binoculars. He's got these bifocals here, y'all, right? He's a reader. He's got that big cranium there. You know, he must be smart, right? Because he's bald-headed. He's got that egg head. Remember the term egghead is going to develop for people who are so supposedly smart. And he's got his beard, y'all. It's just sad. It's just this kind of beard that goes underneath the chin, the part that's really miserable to shave, right? So he's kind of bizarre looking, but he's a Republican. Now, Greeley, up to this point, the only way most AP students would have heard of him, and maybe you guys have heard me mention it or not, I made a big deal of it last year and the previous year. I didn't do it this year. With Lincoln's, or Greeley's letter to Lincoln, Lincoln's letter to Greeley. Now, when the Civil War got started, y'all, Greeley, a Republican, was very, very opposed to slavery, right? Understandably so. That's what Republicans were, right? And so when the Civil War starts, Greeley writes a letter to Lincoln that basically goes, Mr. President, the South has left the Union. Free the slaves now, okay? Don't mess around. Free the slaves now. And Lincoln writes back, and this letter has become a classic example of Lincoln trying to explain how he felt about what was most important in this war. Now, I know Lincoln well enough, y'all. I really feel like I know him better than perhaps any of the presidents that I have studied. And Lincoln, y'all, there was what was going on in Lincoln's mind and what he was thinking and what he thought, what he really believed in his brain. And there was what Lincoln could actually physically do at the time. And they weren't always the same thing. Now, I believe Lincoln wanted slavery over as much as anybody, but that wasn't really possible right then. He was worried about the impact. So when Lincoln writes back to him like, well, hey, Mr. Greeley, thank you for your advice. And Greeley was a newspaper publisher, y'all. So he could say what he wanted to in the newspaper. So he writes Lincoln back, and Lincoln publishes just a letter in his newspaper. So Lincoln basically says to him, Mr. Greeley, if I could end this war right now and reunite this country by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. In other words, if it would help to do it, I would. If I could end this war, reunite the country by freeing no slaves, I would do it. And if I could end this war and reunite the country by freeing some slaves, but letting others stay enslaved, I would do it. And of course, so what's Lincoln saying? Lincoln is saying, what I care most about, at least right now, is uniting this country, ending this war. Now, I think in Lincoln's mind, he was already working on a solution. But at the time, he had to make this a war about reuniting the country and not yet a war about ending slavery. America wasn't ready for that. So up to this point, y'all, that has been Horace Greeley's role in America. Now, Horace Greeley is also famous for something else. A young man came to him, and this was right after the Civil War. And he came up to him, and the young man said, Mr. Greeley, I really respect your opinion. You're a smart man. What should I do for a career? What do I do? And the guy supposedly said, go west, young man. In other words, the future of our country is out west. And that became sort of a motto of a lot of people. So anyway, y'all, this is an interesting guy, and I'll tell you some more about him in just a little bit. Now, Greeley, y'all, his big message was this. Now, remember, Grant had won election under a motto of let us have peace. Grant himself, y'all, wanted the war, and he wanted Reconstruction over with in a lot of ways. But he said it as let us have peace. Greeley, he says it this way. He says basically it is time for us to clasp hands. In other words, to shake hands with our former foes across the bloody chasm. The country was bloodied, y'all, from this terrible Civil War. And he said, it's time that we shake hands. It's time that the country truly come back together. We need to end Reconstruction. We need to bring all those Union soldiers home from Louisiana and Texas and Arkansas and Florida and all those places. That's what he says to do. Now, we're going to look at these two cartoons in some more detail. I saw things in these cartoons today, y'all, that I haven't seen before on them, okay? I love when that happens, but I'll talk about that in just a sec. Now, the election, I wish I could say, was really about what are Greeley's policies going to be. But instead, y'all, he was mainly attacked for wanting to work with the South. But there was also a personal element in it, and that was some of Greeley's weird sort of beliefs, and I'll talk about that in just a sec. Now, this is a cartoon I always include because it freaks out students. Students like Mr. D, that's just gross. What's up with that cartoon? Well, this is the thing, y'all. Remember, Greeley is a Republican philosophically. That's what he has always been. But he's running, y'all, as a Democrat. So you've got a Republican running as a Democrat, but also as a liberal Republican. Now, traditionally, y'all, whenever a political party splinters into two for an election, you can guarantee the other party's going to win. I mean, just imagine this, y'all. Let's say Bernie Sanders had said, Mr. Biden, I don't agree with you enough to support you. I'm asking my people, my Democratic supporters, to vote for me. Well, if you had split the Democratic Party into a Biden wing and to a Sanders wing, you would have pretty much guaranteed that the Republicans would have won because they just wouldn't have had enough votes. Well, that's what usually happens. But Grant, y'all, and it's amazing, I really need to read more about this election. I think it has to do with the fact that people just love General Grant, whether they, and you can understand African Americans loving him because after all, he won the Civil War, he helped end slavery, he had troops down there trying to protect their rights. I can see them voting for him. And of course, you had a lot of Union soldiers and others voting for him. But you did have other people who weren't happy with him. So once again, what's up with this picture? Well, this guy, who the heck is he? Well, if we know our Thomas Nast, and guess what? It's a Thomas Nast cartoon. This guy is kind of simian looking. I hate to say it, but remember, that means he's probably an Irish immigrant. If we're not sure about that, it says Tammany. Ooh, the Democratic political machine. He's probably definitely an Irish immigrant. And remember, in Nast's view, the Democratic Party is the party of these illiterate, ignorant Irish immigrants as he saw them. Yep, my people. But if you notice, you go further, his belt also says KKK. Remember, waving the bloody shirt? Tammany equals KKK. Democrats equals Southerners. Southerners equal secessionists. Secessionists equal Democrats. Democrats, John Wilkes Booth was one. Democrats killed President Lincoln. It's all together, this bloody shirt. Tarnish, paint with a brush, all Democrats as this way. So Greeley, a Republican, y'all, is literally having to swallow the Democratic beliefs, the Democrats themselves. And always, y'all, when you see a Horace Greeley cartoon by Nast, it says, what I know about whatever the topic is. And so you see this, but what are the Democrats also having to do? They're having to swallow Greeley. I mean, it's kind of gross, I get it, you know, but so, I mean, he wants you to be grossed out, like, oh my gosh, this Greeley guy is really willing to swallow hook, line, and sinker everything about the Democrats, and the Democrats are willing to just abandon their beliefs and go with Greeley. It's just disgusting. Well, there you go. Now, the other thing, y'all, as I mentioned, this election also becomes an election about personalities and personal beliefs. Now, I'll be political here, and I'll just say it. I wish people voted more, y'all, on what the candidates believe. All right? What is this guy? What does this gal believe? What are they saying they're going to do for the country? Okay? As opposed to, I don't like that person's hair color. I don't like that person's eyes. That person's too fat. That person's too thin. I don't like that person's skin color. I really wish people would just say, what do they believe? What are they going to do? But instead, y'all, Greeley was attacked for personal reasons. Among his beliefs, this is going to sound like crazy talk, y'all. It's hard to say. Greeley did not believe in eating meat, y'all. He was a vegetarian. Yeah, vegetarian, you know, pretty sick. Well, it was then. People like, vegetarian? You mean like plants and stuff? Instead of meat? Why did God give us these sharp teeth? You know, people just couldn't believe this guy was a vegetarian. Now, today, that's a very accepted belief, right? And, you know, hey, I tried to be a vegetarian, y'all. I want you to know, man, Mr. D was a vegetarian. And I want you to know it was the hardest 2 hours of my life. It was a struggle, man. But anyway, the other thing, y'all, Greeley also believed in free love. Now, what is free love? Because y'all are like, Mr. D, I've never had to pay for it. Well, trust me, we all pay for love in the end. But anyway, he believed that you didn't have to be married to be with somebody, you know, in that sense. He didn't necessarily believe in marriage as most people accepted it then. Man, that was controversial. So people focused a lot on that, y'all, as opposed to what does this guy really believe? And at the same time, you had Nast doing his nasty cartoons against Greeley. And then a weird thing happens, y'all. He loses the election. That wasn't weird, but he died 3 weeks after the election. Now, let's talk about this cartoon. All right, once again, that's Horace Greeley. He's riding what's supposed to be an elephant. Now, how do I know it's an elephant? Well, there are two ways. Whoever says this isn't a real elephant is a liar. Okay? And of course, if you look at it, it kind of has the shape of an elephant, right? See the bump here for the elephant's head. If you look at this, this kind of looks like the trunk of an elephant. Now remember, the elephant represents what political party? The grand old party, the Republican Party. So Greeley, y'all, is pretending to be riding the Republican elephant. But in reality, who really is in charge of the Republican Party? General Grant. So for this guy to say he's a Republican, it's a complete bogus thing, right? And of course, remember, he's going to bring the two parts of the country together. Here's the Confederate battle flag. Here is the American flag. They are tied together. They have come back. But of course, this really isn't an elephant. It's two people, you know, with the flags over their head. If you look here, what is on the leg of the Confederate part of it? KKK. He's reminding you, once again, the Confederacy are the KKK. That's what he is saying here. The what's on the American part here? Tammany. Tammany is here. He's reminding you that his supporters include that corrupt New York Democratic political machine. But yet he's trying to pretend he is truly a Republican. But it's a fake, right? It's very, very fake. And that's what NASS is trying to do. Now, so what happens to Greeley? Well, a weird thing is he loses the election, but 3 weeks after the election, he dies. Now, that's going to make for a really, really weird electoral college. The thing I like to think about, y'all, is what would have happened, say, what if Greeley had lived? What if he had lived and had won? I mean, no, what if he had won and he died? Then we've been in for a mess. And obviously, I'm not saying this about our current president, but, you know, what if Biden hadn't made it to the time he got inaugurated, y'all? From the time he won in November to the time that he became president in January, would Kamala Harris, would she automatically have become it? It's not really clear. Do we then have another election? So it's always kind of weird, y'all, to speculate that. But let's look at this weird election map. This is the weirdest electoral college map ever. Now, when you guys watched the election that night, you heard them call states, right? Like, we have Alabama's votes coming in. That's X number of electoral votes going to Trump. Oh, we have New York coming in. That's X number of votes for Biden, right? And you and I dutifully put them down because when you win a state, you're supposed to pretty much automatically get the electors. Now, that's theory. In reality, what happens is the electors don't meet until November in the state capitals. And then the electors cast their votes. Now, traditionally, and even legally, a lot of them feel obligated to go ahead and cast their vote for whoever won the state, okay? That's in December, okay? And then they send the votes to Washington, D.C. Now, you guys remember the riot that took place on January 1st. What was happening at the time of the riot in the Capitol? They were literally, y'all, counting, and some Republicans were disputing the counting of those votes, of the electoral votes that had come from the state, saying, hey, I don't think that's an accurate whatever, and that's when the riot all happened. Okay, so think about it. Greeley has won your state, right? You're an elector. You're obligated to vote for the dude, but it's December now. Greeley is dead. His body is cold. The worms are eating his body. Do you still vote for the dead dude? Well, it's kind of weird. So what happened, y'all, is Grant got his votes. And if you look, y'all, Grant won big time, 81% of the electoral votes. The Electoral College really magnified Grant's popularity. And Grant won pretty big time in the popular vote, y'all, with 55%. Now, that may not seem like a landslide to you guys, but in politics, anything really above like 53, 54% of the popular vote is considered a landslide. That means there's a lot of unhappy people. But in that case, he was pretty popular. And obviously, look at where Grant won, y'all. He won the West, okay? He won the North. No big surprise there, right? He had been a Union commander. The Republicans controlled most of the North. Although Maryland, y'all, had a lot of Confederate sympathizers. Maryland was a border state, so they went with a Democrat. A couple of these other states did too. And pretty much, y'all, remember, Republican, or I should say Union troops were here. African-American men were voting understandably Republican, and a lot of whites who had been involved in the Confederacy weren't allowed to vote. And so it's no surprise, y'all, that Republicans carried most of the South, except for a few states like Texas, where, you know, maybe more Democrats were able to vote and that kind of thing. But if you're an elector for Greeley, what do? Do you vote for the dead guy? Well, basically, instead, y'all, there were 4 different Democrats. And this what's weird. 8 different men were picked as vice president. So it's just the weirdest election. But what I feel for y'all is in Georgia, you had 3 guys say, you know what? The people wanted Greeley, and I don't care if Greeley's dead. I'm still going to vote for him. And so when those votes went to Washington, D.C., Congress said, are you kidding me? You're voting for the dead dude? Throw those out. And I don't know if they were thrown out or not, but on this official map, y'all, Greeley still has 3 electoral votes. And if you look right here, boom, there they are. The dead guy got 3 electoral votes. Really kind of bizarre. Now, let's look at these 2 cartoons. And as Mr. D said, I actually learned some things from these cartoons today that I didn't know before. And that happens when I start talking to you guys and also when I blow these things up. And sometimes it's students, y'all, who point out things to me that I'd never picked up before, too. Now, here we see Horace Greeley. How do we know it's Horace Greeley? Well, there's his little glasses. There's his kind of plump body. He's got the newspaper right there with HG, letting us know this is Horace Greeley, the dude running for president. Now, remember his infamous line, let us clasp hands over the bloody chasm. Now, here he is standing on the ramparts of this prison camp. And it just isn't any prison camp. But let's first look at Greeley himself. Let's zoom in on him. Now, I've looked at this picture several times over the years. I picked up on something this morning. I had it. Look right here, y'all. His foot is in the air. Now, what's up with that? Well, he's trying to lean as far forward as he can. Now, my camera isn't working, but this dude, y'all, is doing this kind of number, right? He's kind of like a ballerina, a very heavy ballerina. But anyway, he's leaning forward, reaching that arm. Man, the dude is trying to reach out. But look at how far that chasm is, y'all. There is no way physically possible, or some people would even say, you know, psychologically possible, mentally possible, that he could reach hands all the way across this chasm. And if you zoom in on Greeley, there you see, once again, what I know about hands over the bloody chasm, HG Horace Greeley. Now, this is, of course, a reminder. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this or not, but people back in the day, if you were a Union person and you heard the word Andersonville prison, man, you got chills. Because if you guys remember those pictures I showed you of the years after the Civil War, remember Andersonville was the worst of the prisons that Union soldiers were put into in the Confederacy. The Confederates, y'all, couldn't feed their own people, much less thousands of Union prisoners. So they put a lot of them in Georgia, and what did the people do there? They died. They were starved, a lot of them. They didn't have enough food, and of course they died of disease. So, and they're basically kind of using that line from Dante's Inferno. If you know Dante's Inferno, it's this poem about hell written by Dante Alighieri, I guess, but where he says, he, who enters here, abandoned all hope. So basically, Andersonville Prison, whoever entered here, in other words, it's the past tense, whoever entered here left hope behind. In other words, what is Andersonville Prison, y'all? It was hell, hell on earth. Now, let's zoom in on this chasm, the prison itself. Now, what are these? Well, they're not coffins, y'all. I don't think they're coffins. Maybe they are, but they're graves, pretty shallow graves. I mean, the coffin, y'all, or whatever, they really didn't use coffins, y'all. They wrapped them in blankets. They dug long trenches, and then they just lined them side by side. Now, so you see these rows and rows, y'all, of Union dead. But this is where Nast gets really good, y'all. He knows to really tug at your heartstrings. These just aren't forgotten dead. If you look up close, look down here, look here, look here. Now, what's up with these people? Well, if you look on the head of one of them, or the head of them, you see a bonnet. These are women, y'all. And what are these shorter things next to the women? Like here and here? These are their children, y'all. Who do you think these women and children are? They're the wives of the dead men. They are the children of the dead men. And this war is still in their mind, y'all. It is still fresh to them. And so once again, literally over their dead bodies, over the dead bodies of these people's husbands, fathers, whatever, he is expecting you to forgive. Now, this is what I never noticed before until today when I made this picture bigger. What do we got over here, y'all? I should really zoom in on that, but I forgot to do it. We got somebody reaching out to him. So yeah, the Confederates or whoever over here are trying to reach across the bloody chasm. Horace Greeley is trying to reach across the bloody chasm, but it just ain't gonna work. There is too much in that bloody chasm to expect this ever to happen. I mean, to me, this is just beautiful, y'all. It's an amazing, amazing cartoon. And like I said, I never really got the children and the women there, like literally, here they are. This is these kids' daddy, y'all. This is her husband who now is there. And this guy is basically saying, hey, let's forget about it, man. Bygones be bygones. Let's go on. Now, this one, y'all, echoes that other Nast picture you guys saw, the white man's government. Now, here we have Horace Greeley again. How do I know? Well, he's kind of chunky. He's got his bifocals on. He's also got a newspaper stuffed right here. And he's got his hat up, and he's taking his hat off. That could be a sign of respect or a sign of celebration. I'm not quite sure. He's coming out of the polling booth, right? And here you see all the people back there. Now let's zoom in on Horace. There you see him. And oh my gosh, look what his feet are on, y'all. His feet, just like in that white man's government one. Horace Greeley's feet, I don't think his feet are on them, but look at this, y'all. He's got that foot in the air, which is suggesting what? He's about to do it. He is ready, y'all, to step on the body, and they look dead, unlike that other African-American soldier who looked like they might be alive still. He is literally, y'all, ready to step right on top of this African-American man. And right here, we have an African-American soldier, and this guy might be too, I'm not quite sure. And look at this, y'all. The Confederate, and this is something I noticed today too that I had never noticed. He is indeed shaking the hands of the dude, right? He is shaking hands with Greeley. He is coming across that bloody chasm. They are uniting together. But look at the Confederate guy's arm here, y'all. What's he got in his arm? He's got a gun. So yeah, I want peace. Boy, I've got my gun ready to blow you away if I need to. I mean, you can't really trust him. He doesn't trust Greeley, but Greeley apparently trusts him. He is ready at any moment, y'all, to blow Greeley away. And his foot is definitely on the body of these brave African-American soldiers. Now, remember the story I told y'all, where the African-American soldier, Kearney, had carried the American flag in the attack at Fort Wagner. And he'd been shot multiple times. And the dude, y'all, made his way back to Union lines. And he collapsed. But before he collapsed, and he did survive, he handed the flag over to somebody and he said, "The old flag, she never touched the ground." Now today, y'all, Americans have a lot less respect for the American flag. You see it burnt, you see it trampled. That has been affirmed as a right that people have under the Constitution. Once again, I'll be political here. I don't like it myself. I hate to see that disrespect for the American flag, but people have the right to do it. Back then, y'all, nobody would have said you had the right to do that. So sometimes, y'all, don't look at it through your modern eyes like, oh, the flag's on the ground, big deal. Look at it as, ooh, back then, the flag on the ground, that would have been a big insult. That would have got people mad. We just had a civil war to save that flag, to save that country that that flag represents. And what's happening? Greeley is shaking hands with the dude stepping on the top of two African-American men who died fighting to save that flag. And look at it, y'all. The staff of the flag is literally broken, okay? I mean, it is shattered. You even can see it looks like some blood coming out of this guy. Now, in the background, a lot of people look at this and go, oh, that's a battle from the Civil War. As you'll see, it's something else. Now, notice this line here, anything to beat Grant. Now, a lot of Republicans, y'all, and definitely Democrats were willing to do anything to get General Grant out. And how is that demonstrated? Well, we see Greeley, a Republican, running as a Democrat, shaking hands with basically the devil, the Confederates, literally over the bodies of brave Americans. And it says, anything to beat Grant, and the poll. He's going to let these people vote. Now, the picture in the background, like I said, often is believed to be a Civil War battle, but it's not, y'all. In several American cities, such as New Orleans, Memphis, other places, too many to name, y'all, white militia types like these here, maybe former Confederates, maybe KKK types. There were massacres of African-American men, okay? And that's what's happening here. These guys are shooting away. You see several of the African-Americans turning and running. Only a handful of them have guns. This dude's got a gun, it looks like. This dude's got a gun. These dudes all have guns. You know, they're all charging. One guy is already on the ground, and he's probably done for. And so, once again, he's reminding you, Greeley is making a deal with people that did this, the people who fought for our country. He is making a deal with people who condone and allow massacres of former slaves, freedmen, and do nothing about that. Powerful, powerful cartoon, y'all. Now, the next thing to talk about here is black adjustment in the South. Now, as Union troops leave the South, African Americans are going to find those achievements, those things that they had happen, positive things that happened, are gradually going to be eroded and are going to disappear. Now, AP usually doesn't do this, but AP basically is giving a verdict right here on Reconstruction. And this is how they feel. And this is where pretty much modern day scholarship feels about Reconstruction today, y'all. Modern day scholarship sees Reconstruction as a kind of partial success. In theory, it seemed good, but in fact, pretty much all of the gains of Reconstruction were lost over time. It says, yeah, great. We gave citizenship to African Americans with the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the laws under the 14th Amendment. We let African American men vote with the 15th Amendment. That's all awesome. But over time, those rights were slowly stripped away. And what were the methods? Jim Crow, segregation, separating the races, violence like you saw with the Klan or others, and Supreme Court decisions that are going to chip away at things like the Civil Rights Act. And we'll look at that part tomorrow. And also just the tactics that were used in political tactics. Now, the term redeemers, okay? the term redeemers, I want to talk about that a little bit. Now, when you guys go, and you probably don't go anymore. My daughter, y'all, once got kicked out of Chuck E. Cheese. I don't know what the heck she did, but I bought a Chuck E. Cheese shirt, y'all, and I put the little line thing through it and like wrote "not welcome." But anyway, you know, when you go to Chuck E. Cheese and you play their games, you might spend 20 or 30 bucks doing the skeet ball, whatever. And when you're done, they give you a bunch of little coupons, right? They give you a bunch of tickets. And you take those tickets to the booth and you redeem them for some gift. You spend 25 bucks, you get a 30-cent gift, right? Like, oh, I got this cute teddy bear. Oh, it's awesome, right? You redeem it. You get it back. You get something back for what you went through. Southerners, y'all, are going to be called redeemers who to get the South back. The South at least somewhat back like it was beforehand. Now, who were these redeemers? Well, there were Northerners who did this, but also your old Southerners, y'all. They wanted to get back the South, okay? Now, you had people in the North cooperate with them. If I'm a Democrat in the North, I know I ain't going to win any election unless I get Southerners back voting, at least white Southerners. I got to get those black Republicans or those radical Republicans out of the South or keep them from voting. So redeemers, y'all, were all about people who wanted to get the South back and get the South Democratic again so they could have a chance at winning election. You guys saw how General Grant or President Grant hardly won a single election how General Grant pretty much won the entire South, right? Well, that wasn't going to happen much longer after redemption. Now, we're going to look through this, okay? So how did they do this? Even though technically blacks could vote, black men could vote, and a lot of white men couldn't vote because of their participation in the Confederacy, how do they get the South back to being Democratic rule? Well, the first method they used, y'all, to take away the vote from the blacks was good old-fashioned intimidation. Now, I apologize for how small this was, y'all. I tried to make it into a separate slide. I had PowerPoint crash. Remember when that happened? And then I tried to, and it was lost. But the first thing they did, y'all, was intimidation. Now, this political cartoon, or really isn't a cartoon, y'all. This is more just a, you know, they couldn't reproduce photographs back in the day. So they had people do metal engravings, and they would put that in the newspaper. But anyway, I think they were called lithographs or whatever. But anyway, y'all, we see a scene here. So let's look at this a little bit more close up. Intimidation. Now, here we see a black family. The husband is away. I don't see him in the picture anywhere, which means the family is very vulnerable in those days. We have the Klan or something like the Klan attacking, right? They've got their bags on the head. This isn't the pointy hoods we associate with the later Klan. This is just some bag over their head in some weird sort of outfit. We got the family cooking here. Right? We got this little boy, looks like he's having him some soup or something. And then we have the little kid here, just like watching mommy cooking. Now, in those days, y'all, fireplaces served as a source of light. They served as basically to warm you, but also you did your cooking there. And believe it or not, after childbirth, which was the most dangerous thing that women went through, the other most dangerous thing, y'all, were fires catching women's clothes on fire. They didn't have flame retardant clothes. And sadly, y'all, this happened quite a bit because the fireplace, y'all, was as tall as you were to cook in. All right, and if you look here really closely, y'all, you see a Klansman shooting. And look at that window, y'all. There's another Klansman in the window. He looks kind of like a Schnauzer dog, but it's a Klansman. Second thing, y'all, that was used, and I hate that you guys are having to write these all down. I know it's a pain to write in Cami because I had to do it the other day for a recommendation. But this is so, so important, y'all. These four things I'm going to talk about are used in the American South to keep African American men who constitutionally have the right to vote, and later women, right, as well too, will have the right to vote, to keep them from being able to vote, at least to vote when it mattered. Now, literacy tests, the idea seems fairly sound, right? Yeah, you want people who can read or write to be able to vote, because how else do they get to know what's happening? How else do they know what the candidates were? How can they even read the ballot, right? But the problem with it is the way it was administered, and also a loophole. Now, the literacy test could test basic literacy. And when you failed, if you did fail, they would ask you, hey, you failed. Sorry, man. But question, could your grandfather vote? Well, if you were white, probably a good chance your grandfather could vote. And you would say, well, yeah, he could vote thanks to Andrew Jackson and them. All right, cool. Well, you know what? You're going to be able to vote because your grandfather could vote. If you were black and you failed, they could ask the same question. Hey, did your grandfather vote? No, he was a slave. Oh, yeah, that's right. Looks like you're not going to be voting. So that was called the grandfather clause. If your grandfather could vote, you could vote. But blacks, of course, their grandparents probably, almost certainly, had not been able to vote. So it was a way to let illiterate, quote, whites vote, but not to allow illiterate blacks to vote. And also, y'all, remember, despite all the work of the Freedmen School and their amazing work at teaching African Americans who had not been allowed to learn to read or write as slaves, despite all that work, there were still, through no fault of their own, a lot of blacks who couldn't read or write. Now, the other problem, y'all, was how this literacy test was given. It wasn't always the same literacy test. Sometimes it might be something as simple as, here is a passage from the state code of laws. Read it. Tell me what it means. Well, heck, almost anybody'd have a hard time figuring that out, unless maybe, of course, you were a lawyer or something. Or, you know, and you might give an easier passage to somebody, maybe white, that you would like to vote, and a harder one to somebody else. So these tests, y'all, weren't uniformly equally administered. So that's going to be the problem. And y'all, we keep these literacy tests in a lot of ways into the 50s and even into the 1960s. This stuff that you guys are writing down would be used all the way into the 1960s. It took an amendment to end one of these things. It took laws like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 64 and 1965, y'all. Mr. D's actually alive during that time to change this. That's how long these things lasted. Now, poll taxes. Elections cost money. So the idea was the people who are voting should help pay for the election. Once again, doesn't seem like a bad idea, but in practice, think about it. If you're really poor, and you're having a hard time, you know, getting the next week's groceries, and they say to you, hey, we need $3 or $4 for you to be able to vote. And you're like, And remember, $3 or $4 went a long way back then. Well, feed the family or vote. Feed the family or vote. Well, we know what you're going to pick. You're going to pick to obviously feed your family. And so, well, I'd like to vote. I'm willing to put up with the KK intimidation. I passed the literacy test, but I don't have the money to vote. And then the last thing was, even if you could vote in the actual election, you couldn't vote in the primaries. Now, primaries, y'all, were allowed to be run by the states. The federal government didn't really have the right to tell you as a state who could and who couldn't vote in the primaries. For example, people in our territories like Puerto Rico or in other places, they can vote in primaries, but they can't vote in the actual election because primaries are really more under the control of the party rather than the control of the state, or at least they were, or the federal government, I should say. Now, remember, y'all, as whites start getting the right to vote again, and after the Republican or the Union soldiers leave, many blacks are finding they don't have the right to vote. And so over time, pretty much the only party that had a snowball's chance in HE double hockey stick, two hockey sticks, double hockey stick, the only party that had a chance to win anything in the South, y'all, were the Democrats. In fact, we developed a term, yellow dog Democrats. Southerners, y'all, were so determined to vote Democrat that they would vote even for a yellow dog if it were a yellow dog Democrat. And then the other thing, y'all, is this term called the Solid South. Democrats, y'all, until the 1980s could pretty much count on all the Southern states. In fact, it's such a thing that, you know, when a Southern state voted Republican, it's like, oh, what's going on here, man? They voted Republican. What's up with that? So the thing was this, y'all. If you were going to vote and you were black, you're probably voting Republican in those days. Your guy wasn't going to win. There wasn't a chance. So, hey, maybe you should help with the Democrats, right? And maybe pick a Democrat who maybe agrees more with you. But what they said was, you know what? We're going to let you vote in the general election. You'll get to choose between the Democrat who's going to win or the poor, dumb Republican who's winning or trying to run but will never run or never will win. And so the whites only primary, y'all, work this way. We're only going to let white people vote in the primary. Now, when we have the real election, we are required to let you black people vote. But by then, y'all, it was over. The real election, so to speak, wasn't between the Democrat and the Republican in the South. The real election in southern states, y'all, was who gets to be the Democratic nominee because of the primary. And you guys remember the primaries. You guys remember when we were trying to decide if it was going to be Biden or Pete Buttigieg, or if it was going to be Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris or whoever, right? We had primaries in all the states. Now, generally speaking, only Democrats are supposed to vote in those. But remember, if you're black, you couldn't participate in those primaries. And as a result, the candidate was already selected. When it came time to vote, you could vote Republican, but he was going to lose. You could vote Democrat, sure, but hey, the Democrat had been selected by whites who weren't necessarily going to do what you wanted as a black person, right? So there you go. So these four things, y'all, I know it's a lot. Remember them, because one by one, they are going to have to be removed in the 1960s. It's a big part of the civil rights movement to get these various types of disenfranchisement removed. And it's why today you see a lot of people, Democrats especially, African Americans generally, very worried when they start seeing people messing with voting rolls or things like that, because they can remember the days, y'all, when they weren't allowed to vote or when various obstacles were put in the way of them being able to vote. So if you understand the history a little bit, you'll understand why people act or respond as they do today. All right, that will end it for today. Tomorrow we will wrap up Reconstruction. Yay. We'll talk about people waning their enthusiasm for Reconstruction, and that'll set you guys up for hopefully the PowerPoint, or not PowerPoint, the DBQ. That's it. All right, so we're done. I'm waving my hands, and I know my camera isn't working, but still, there you go. Have a good day. Take care. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.